Welcome to Customer Driven with Chad McDaniel. Well known throughout the customer leadership industry, Chad has been the chief community leader for Execs in the Know, one of the top executive customer advocacy groups on the planet. With a passion for customer success and a desire to share and develop best practices, Chad's conversations with industry leaders aim to give unfiltered, unplugged access to industry peers who are customer obsessed, just like you. If you enjoy the show, please be sure to rate and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. Now here's your host, Chad McDaniel.
Welcome to Customer Driven with Chad McDaniel, and I hope everyone's having a great summer. It still amazes me that how fast this year has gone in 2019. Here we are at the end of the June time period, but at the end of the day, it's been a very successful year. I think a lot of our customer leaders and execs in the know are doing amazing things in their organization and really making customer first. And we challenge that at every moment of time with our leaders. If you're not familiar with execs in the know, just a real quick piece on us. Execs in the know is a very large corporate end user community of brands that are sharing direct insights, best practices, everything around customer experience, customer engagement, customer success. If you're not involved with our community, our leadership group, I would strongly encourage you to get involved. Just go to execsintheknow.com. There's a number of ways you can join our online community. You can participate in our leadership events. You can come to our lunch and learns and briefings, all sorts of things that we're doing to really enable the voice of the customer leader. We are your advocate, and we're here for you. One of the things I enjoy about the podcast series Customer Driven is bringing in a variety of show guests, and I'm getting ready to introduce Scott Simpson here shortly, our today's show guest, but to really elevate some of the kind of mind share and thinking and conversational aspects that we find we can have in the podcast series. So anyhow, I want to get started. Welcome to all of our listeners, but at the same point, Scott Simpson is with Precision Staffing. Scott's based in Cincinnati, Ohio, and one of the things I really wanted to do in today's episode is address sort of the state of the call center agent recruitment and hiring and what really is taking place, kind of 2.0, 3.0, whatever you want to call it. But how is it different than 10 years ago? What has changed? What are the current metrics and the current sort of state of that state? Scott, thank you for joining. It was a pleasure to have you as our show guest today and help me with some of that thought leadership and guidance. What we should do, Scott, is for our listeners is let's start out a little bit about your organization, what you guys are doing, and then let's jump into the conversation.
Sure, Chad. Well, I appreciate you having me on the show. It's an honor to be a guest, and thank you to all the listeners out there. I hope we can add some value and give you some insight into the state of recruiting, especially in the contact center space and agent recruiting, and hopefully you take a few things away from this. A little bit about Precision Staffing is that we specialize in the recruitment and staffing of the contact center industry. We recruit from the agent level up to a site director level. And what we have seen, we were founded in 2008. So, Chad, you picked a perfect time frame of 10 years because that's approximately how long we've been in business now. And I came out of a large global BPO, and the recruiting we do globally versus what we do to recruit within sites in the U.S. is dramatically different. But the trends we've seen is a lot in branding and marketing of your site and how that needs to trickle through all the way down to agent recruiting. And especially with the job market the way it is, you can almost expect that for every offer you put out, that candidate has 2 to 3 offers in hand, and they get to select what organization they want to join and grow their career. So we really need to put a concentrated effort behind marketing and branding. And that's a large trend that we've seen gain a lot of sophistication over the last 10 years and what organizations are doing to attract top talent to their companies.
So let me do this, Scott. I mean, that's a great segue, and we're going to get back to that because that you brought up a very, very critical point and interesting observation. Because there's no question that has changed fundamentally in the last 10 years, and where they have those 2, 3, 4 offers maybe in hand, based on current work demographics and employment and the many things that are going on. One thing I wanted to really advocate as we start the show for our customer leaders is that I absolutely know, and probably we'll call it 80% plus of consumers, and we're consumers too. When we call into an organization, I don't care how great the tools are, the knowledge management systems, or speed of answer, whatever the scenario be. But when I interact with that agent, it sets the whole experience and perspective I would have with that brand, good, bad, or indifferent. If I'm having a great agent experience, no matter what the resolution is or isn't for the most part, it just changes the whole dynamic. And I don't think there's anyone in this call or listening to this that would disagree with that. So if we set that baseline and we say that is absolutely correct and state of the state, then what are we doing about it? And how are we actively addressing through all of these challenges to what Scott just brought up, but also how we're continuing to differentiate that customer experience when they're dealing with our agent groups. So, Scott, a clarification for our audience here is that within your staffing organization, around 85% is temp to hire. That's at the agent level, and the balance we'll call is sort of the direct hire supervisors, those type of things within an organization. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So let's go back to what you were saying in that trend. And I do want to talk about some of the metrics of cost to fill, time to fill, attrition and turnover within agent staffing, what's sort of been taking place there. But Scott, you raised a very good point, and knowing that's the state of the situation right now, what are organizations, or you're seeing successful organizations doing about that branding and that marketing component?
Well, within marketing and branding, I think it's consistency, from their website to flyers to advertising, that you have a consistent flow. I know we did an analysis of our own material and did find that some of the material we were putting out, like a flyer or some of the signs that we are now hiring signs, did not flow. We did a huge overhaul of our website and then did not turn to our marketing material, and so it was giving a very different, it looked like two separate organizations, which is certainly not the communication we wanted to the community. And whether you're working with state agencies or veteran groups or whatever outside organization to help find talent, they need to know what you stand for and what type of experience. And you're absolutely correct with, we all strive to have a phenomenal customer experience, and that's what we want to deliver to our clients. But we also, in recruiting, look at what is the candidate's experience. How does that flow go from that first phone screen to the hiring process to onboarding into training? What is that experience for the candidate? And I think that word experience is tremendously powerful, where it's not just a phone screen. It's not just an interview. It's an experience that that candidate is having, and that flows directly into the experience that that agent will be then delivering to the customer. And that all ties into your marketing brand, and your image out to the community.
And again, a great point, Scott. And let's say, okay, I've got that down, or we need to relook at it, because if in this competitive market where they're having 2 to 3 multiple job offers at the agent level, so to speak, we have to really up our game and ensure as an organization we're looking at these things. And I'm hopeful that a lot of people listening are doing that and going through that kind of journey of candidate experience, and looking at that closely. So let's say we get that figured out, and then we get them into this transition to nesting period. Can you explain a little bit about that? And again, after you explain that, what are some ideas, trends, and best practices in there? So let's discuss that concept.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it really comes to, I think, empathy of an agent and understanding whether you're an internal customer care center or a BPO, what are the programs that the agents are going to be supporting, and understanding the behavioral traits that are going to best align themselves with that particular program or the product, whether you're an internal customer care team or a BPO. Um, and you should build assessments and interview questions that are going to pull out those behavior traits, so you can identify that so they can then utilize that from an empathy standpoint as they make that transition. Because we do see classroom training to nesting, and when they start to get on the floor, starting to take live calls, that's where we see some turnover starting to arise. And how are we handling that? I think is critical. Um, and that empathy, and if the behavioral traits line up with what you're looking to drive as a customer experience, I think you're going to go a long way with a successful agent. Um, but some cool things that we've seen our clients do from a retention standpoint is what they're looking at is environment and culture. So once they've gotten a candidate on board, and you mentioned we figured that out, and so and a lot of our clients have, and so we want to keep those awesome agents. And some cool things they've done is they've hired culture coaches. So they'll have a culture coach on site where they will, agents can go in there. If they have a tough call, a lot of people don't call customer care because they're just tremendously excited about the product that they're working with. So they have a tough call, they have somebody to turn to. And I know that's a resource and it's not revenue generation, but how cool is it to have that kind of resource within a site where an agent can just turn to? Maybe they're having matters outside of the site that's having them distracted. Maybe they're just facing, complicated issues, but they have somebody to turn to, and a shoulder to cry on, so to speak. And that just goes such a long way from an environment builder. And we've seen break rooms with ping pong tables. One of our clients has a weekly ping pong tournament, where all the agents participate. And they said agents actually come in early and they skip breaks and finish lunches early just to play ping pong. So just building cool environments on site where agents are excited to come to work and they're having fun during the workday. We see a lot of those things, and that are tremendously effective.
Oh, that's great, Scott, and well noted, and I love it. Hey, and this cultural coach thing, that is awesome. And if any listeners are doing that, please reach out to me, Chad at execsintheknow.com. I'd love to hear what you've done with the cultural embedment with agent success and retention. So let's get those ideas out there, and I'd love to share them with the broader community of execs in the know. So transitioning on here a little bit, Scott, because time always goes so fast, and I want to get into specific metrics and trends. So there's a couple aspects here. One is the call center voice agent recruitment and staffing, and then there is the nuance in the last 10 years is the digital agent in the sense of social media support, chat support. And these type of agent fields are going to maybe have a little bit different assessments and interview process. And they may even have different metrics around cost to fill, time to fill, attrition, and so forth. So we're going to put these in two different buckets, if that's fair enough. Let's start with the call center agent. So cost to fill for a typical agent, I know from a domestic US perspective, we'll put it into there, and it's kind of an average of the average, and it can be fairly ranging. But my data from, let's say, within the last 3-4 years, was the typical cost was around 2,000 or 2,500 to hire a new agent. or let's say just under 3,000, somewhere in that range. And that takes in a lot of different factors to come up with that cost, but it's substantial, especially if you're hiring multiple agents. Do you find today, 2019, that metric somewhat accurate, or do you find that has increased or even changed, gone down?
Well, it certainly has not reduced. It has actually just slightly ticked up. And a lot of that is with advertising and the market. Indeed is the number one source that companies are turning to do their recruiting, and Indeed is capturing this market. And you cannot turn on a radio without hearing an ad for Indeed, and so their pricing has certainly followed suit, and they're trying to capture the employment market just like any organization would. So the cost of hiring, I mean, this was your statistics are the last 3 to 4 years, but I think it holds fairly steady and ticked up just slightly based on the cost of advertising.
Okay, good point. So for call center voice agent support, it's going to be somewhere in that metric. And then that's why it's so important that we have that successful nesting and onboarding and actual to the floor taking calls, so to speak. Um, let's go time to fill for the
Sure.
call center agent voice. In each sector could be a little bit different. If it's financial services, retail, I think, and again, some of the data we've seen, uh, financial services, it was around 38 days to fill a customer service agent, or just under 40 days, I want to say. Um, but what are you seeing when you're working with different client groups? What is the time to fill and recruit for some of these call center agent roles, knowing the tight employment market we're in today?
Yeah, I can see that. Well, what we do see is that this is a little bit longer, and it's due to a couple factors. It's training and the ability to get enough agents in the class. So one of our clients, they filled a class on their own, and they only had 20 of the 24 spots filled, which means their client had 4 open schedules that didn't get filled, but they needed to get the class started anyway. So you're trying to work with the training schedules and the trainers, and then you, of course, have your client demands of getting the seats filled, but recruiting has to fill those seats before they can start training. So there's some calculation to it, and so we've seen that actually push out a little bit, and it depends on how technical the product is and training, as well as the recruiter's ability to fill the seats. And so with the current, I keep going back to this current job market, but it's so tight that filling the class has never been more challenging, and so we are seeing that getting pushed out a little bit further.
Yeah, and that puts a lot of pressure on you and others to how you're going to get creative to work through that dimension. One other quick metric, and then we'll move on, is just attrition and turnover. And again, industry companies, this can vary significantly from under 30% to over 50%. Has there been any major shift, though, about general attrition? Are we seeing more attrition because these agents are out there shopping, they got better job offers, and we're not getting the culture right, or we're not getting the experience right? They're going to be like, hey, I'm leaving, I'm going to go somewhere else, or what are you finding there?
So, we're in the Midwest, and what we're seeing is attrition is tightly tied to pay. And I know it's a large challenge in the BPO space because margins are so tight with your clients that it's hard to increase the pay too much, and still have some margin. But in our geographic region, which might change out on the coast as opposed to in the Midwest, what we're seeing that anything under 14, we're seeing a tremendously high volume of turnover because they can walk across the street and pick up another job very quickly and easily. And if you're 15 and over, that retention gets tremendously shored up. And so I would say that 30% from an internal customer care is probably fairly accurate. And from a BPO, 50% Sounds a little on the high side, but sounds in the range. But really, we tie it at the agent level a lot to pay. And if you're not offering a fair wage, they will walk across the street and take those two or three other offers they already have in hand.
So the competitive wage analysis and focus is critical because that one difference in 14 to 15 can make or break in so many other ways. By the way, for our listeners, you've been hearing our show guest today, Scott Simpson, who is the president and CEO of Precision Staffing. And for those that have been listening, I'd love to hear your metrics when you're in this cost to fill, time to fill, attrition, turnover. What are you seeing? I mean, you can email me, chat@execsintheknow.com. You can tell me what industry you're in and just what your metrics are, because I think it's a common focal point for all of us in the CX industry as we move into 2020, how we're going to continue to address these changing demographics and challenges in the workforce structure and some of the alternative workforce structures that are coming up there too. So, Scott, you're in the business to help ease the pain. I'm a client listening to this call. I'm a client organization. Obviously, you're there to help client organizations offload the burden of this effort, and you will streamline that for them and help them do that. So you get to see a lot of different clients and client organizations. I'm sure there's some best practices that you found work very successful. You've shared a few of them in the show here. Before we move into the social media chat agent component for the call center agent voice, is there any just advice or suggestion for those listening that you've seen from the client groups you worked with, any other tidbits or best practices, some nuggets that we could take away from?
Absolutely. And I think I referenced this a little bit earlier, but when you're looking at a call center agent, I think what we say is soft skills outweigh technical skills. And what we mean by that is, what is the character of an individual and the values of an individual? And we believe a person is more than a piece of paper, or they're greater than what a resume may state. And so really getting to know an individual and whether their character, their empathy level, and their service level is going to align with your what you intend your customer experience to be. So defining what your goal is for a customer experience, defining the traits of what will be successful to support your product or program, and define interview questions and behavioral questions. I love stories. So give me a time when. One of the questions we like to ask is if somebody put a project on your desk with little or no direction, how would you go about completing that task? Or tell me about a time when you were asked to do more than you felt was reasonable. And of course, you're looking for, well, I just jumped right in. I did, it needed to be done and I was asked to do it. But a lot of times you get a very different response of, well, that wasn't in my job description. And so you start getting a pinpoint, what are the characteristics and what are the soft skills of that individual. And I think that's going to go a lot more than saying, well, this person has 2 years of call center experience, so let's hire them. So that's our soft skills versus technical skills, where we really try to make a solid evaluation.
Well, Scott, that's great. I mean, the soft skills versus technical skills and some of the pieces you put around it. But this is a big one, and I would love to get your perspective and include in the audience. So I hope everyone's really listening, is the social media aspect of how are public profiles of people's social media accounts, whatever that candidate is putting out there publicly in their social media sphere. How has that become into the recruitment mix? Are we looking at that social media profiles publicly that people are putting out there to determine the right kind of candidate? I know it's an additional layer of time and it's additional information scrape, but what are your thoughts there? What's taking place with social media profiling to determine the character of an individual or the right kind of fit.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point, and that is so new. I've actually been on 2 or 3 different legal seminars that hosted that topic because there's been some lawsuits of, especially in employment law, where a candidate was eliminated from a position because they didn't feel like the person was a good culture fit because they saw pictures of the person partying over the weekend and they didn't want to, have that lingering in and maybe causing attendance issues or whatnot. And the person sued for a violation of privacy. However, the company won that case because you put it on the internet, it's public. And so the case law is still being written. And I know that's a hot topic in DC and a lot of state legislation. But we are seeing HR going to Facebook, looking candidates up. And we've done some of that as well. And just trying to get to know the person a little bit better. And it's amazing what you can see on the Facebook and even ourselves. We know that there are going to be employees, our bosses, our supervisors, coworkers. Facebook is public. So watch your settings, make sure your notifications are set to how you want it. Maybe you want to look at selecting only your friends or your LinkedIn membership group have the ability to see what you're posting, or maybe just watch what you post. But it's certainly a interesting time as that not a lot of legislation has been written for it, but it is certainly out there, and there's some suits that are currently underway, and we look forward to seeing how those are going to be settled.
Now, that's a great topic. And again, I want to learn more and explore more. If any listeners have ideas, suggestions there, what they're doing, I'd love to hear from you. Scott, in your process, though, let's say there's 3 different clients that are coming to you to use your services to help in the candidate selection agent candidate. Do you have a sign off, or do they have to explicitly agree that you use that as a process, the social media review, whatever you want to call it, and they have to agree to it? Or is that just something that, how does that work from your side?
Yeah, so we would typically do that as our, when we're recruiting, we have a funnel. And so we start with a lot of people and cast out a really wide net. And then based on client criteria, we shrink that net down. And we have a Fair Credit Reporting Act sign off page that the candidate signs off. So whether a client comes to us, 3 or 10 of them, the candidate's already signed off on a Fair Credit Reporting Act, which authorizes us to do investigation on the candidate. So we're pretty free to go through the investigation process of a candidate prior to setting up interviews for a client.
Has a client ever said to you explicitly, we do not want this part of the recruitment process, please make sure you're not doing that, or does it not work that way?
It has not worked that way. It hasn't come up. Where we get it is we've sent somebody over for an interview and they said, we looked at their Facebook page and we'd like to remove this person from consideration. So really the social media has become an additional screener. We have never had somebody call us and say, I looked at their Facebook page and we really want to make sure we hire this person. So if you're going out to Facebook, it's typically you're trying to validate a negative feeling towards somebody, not because you have positive vibes and you want to continue your investigation. So we see it as an added screener to the process.
Perfect. We'll leave it at that as an added screener, and thank you. And with the little bit of time we have left here, I'm going to move on quickly to the recruitment side of the digital agent, being the social media or chat support agent. Of everything we've talked about, are there just any other differences there outside of maybe some of the skill sets and what you're looking to, how you hire those individuals? But is there anything that is uniquely different than the call center voice agent that we should just kind of capture on this episode?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the chat positions that we've been placing, and as well as email support, that you really need to look at an individual's writing style. And we've been doing writing samples and then evaluating those writing samples. But I think in the world of texting that we live in, I think chat support and text messaging have become very similar, that we're not necessarily writing in full sentences any longer. And I see that filtering into email, but certainly knowing your audience and email support, that I think that really making sure that you do, I know we talked about earlier, soft skill versus technical skills, but writing style, and if you're going to have black and white, writing in front of a customer, you really want to make sure the messaging that you intend is reaching that customer. And we started with customer experience, and I think that's the message we need to carry through the entire process, is that it's an experience, and having poor grammar or misspelled words is going to really impact the experience, and making sure you have the correct technical assessments when you're looking at those positions. But also keep in mind, the style we live in today is not writing in full sentence and not proper grammar, especially in chat support.
Very well stated. And I think that's a whole nother conversation we could have, Scott, because those channels of support staff hiring are going to continue to increase as we look out over the next, X number of years here coming up. So I think we as leaders got to really continue to look at that. Scott, you've been a great guest. If you've got a lot of good ideas and how you're looking at it in the front line of it, so to speak. For those that are listening today, if they would like to reach out just to get more ideas, how would they best reach you? What's the best way to get a hold of you?
I'd say it's one of two ways. You could just email me directly. It's sts@precisionstaffingusa.com, or you can visit our website at precisionstaffingusa.com, where we have a contact us page, and that email will come directly to me as well. It would eventually land in my email box. But those would be the two primary ways. ST as in Tom, S@precisionstaffingusa.com, or visiting our website, precisionstaffingusa.com.
Perfect. I'll make sure I'll get that included in the show notes, so to make it easy for everyone. And they also can find you on LinkedIn, Scott Simpson, in Cincinnati, Ohio. Scott, as we close out today's session, first of all, thank you as being a guest. For our listeners today, again, Customer Driven Podcast is a very dialogue format where we can talk about current trends, needs, issues going on. If you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, again, just reach out to me, Chad, at execsintheknow.com. Happy to learn a little bit more about what you're working on. But at the end of the day, we are all in this together as a large group of customer leaders. We need each other more than ever as far as navigating these challenging paths and waters that we're in, between our customer design systems to customer experience to even the agent aspect of what we've touched on a little bit today. If you've enjoyed today's show, I would encourage you to rate, subscribe to Customer Driven on all the major distribution centers. The podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify would be greatly appreciated. From my perspective, Scott, thank you. Everyone, please keep customer top of mind. We owe it to ourselves that we have to make customer success the number one priority in our industry and to our organizations. Keep up the great work. Have a great rest of the day here, and I appreciate your listenership today.
Thank you for listening to Customer Driven with Chad McDaniel. If you enjoyed the show, please be sure to rate and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. It really makes a difference in helping others find the podcast. For more information on our customer experience community, please visit execsintheknow.com.